Happy Sunday. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel Gonzalez. I am a recovering perfectionist, just trying to become more like Jesus and live in God's perfect will for my life. The past couple of months, I've been doing some book recaps, and I'm not sure how many people are really watching these videos, but one of the things that I love to do is I love to read, and that is one of the things that brings me the most rest and peace in my life. And then also I love talking to people about what I've read, and I always love having discussions, especially about some of the books that I'm going to talk about here today. Like I love having discussions at the end when there's I have questions and things, because then I can get other people's perspectives. And so I've been in a book club on Facebook for probably 6 or 7 months now. And they just started meeting up in person. And so hopefully this month is going to be the month that I get to meet up with them. And I started another book club in Bastrop. So with some people that I haven't met yet, actually, but just, we were reading a book, and then they do meetups also. So hopefully I can get to that. But then it's just nice to, have one, different perspectives on these books, but then two, books that are voted on and recommended that I never would have read on my own. So it kind of puts me out of my comfort zone. That's actually how I got onto Freida McFadden, because we read one of the books of hers in a book club. And then I was like, oh, I really liked her stuff. So now I read, I did some in January, some in February, and I read a couple in March. So I'll talk about that. But the first book that I read last month was called The Last Phone Booth in Manhattan. And that book is by Beth, Merlin, and Danielle Modafferi. They're actually teachers who I think just collabed and wrote a book together. And it was actually really good. I read it on Kindle and actually read it. So it was not an audiobook. I did read it. And I gave that book a 5-star rating because I had never heard of it before, and it ended up it was one of my Amazon first reads. So I don't know if you know this, but if you are an Amazon Prime member, you can get free, one free book per month. And sometimes they do 2 books if they're feeling nice. And those books then are they're called editor's picks. So they might not be as popular of books or whatever, but just, books that you can read for free. And so I picked this one up. And I had no expectations because I had never heard of it and, whatever, but I thought it was so good. I read it so quickly, even for having to actually read the book and not listen to it. But so basically what the book is it's this girl, and she, at the beginning of the book, it's she has it all, and her boyfriend is this super successful guy, and he's super rich. And so she, for the past, I think it's 7 years, had just been, I don't know, kind of floating through life with him, funding it for her, and she didn't work, and she just, did whatever she wanted all the time. And at the very beginning of the book, her and her fiance end up getting arrested, and she has no clue why. And then when she gets out, she realizes that it's because he has committed some crimes, which is actually how he's gotten so rich and all that. She ends up, outside of the jail, and gets directions, to she needs to use the phone. And the lady's like, oh, I can't let you use the phone here. You have to, find a different avenue for getting a hold of somebody. And she goes, but there's this phone booth, and she gives her directions to the phone booth. And then she goes to the phone booth. So it's the last phone booth in Manhattan. And basically through this phone booth situation, she ends up opening a door into her past, which there's a lot of references in this book to Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol and a bunch of other Charles Dickens books, which this actually made me really want to read a lot of Charles Dickens books, because they would have these quotes, and then I'm I should probably have read that book. It's a classic, so I have some of those books on my list now. But she gets kind of this Christmas Carol redo. She, gets some flashes from her past. So she starts working at a place where she used to work. She runs into her ex-boyfriend, and that kind of develops into something. And then really what it is that she left a career where she was trying to become like a Broadway star when she met this criminal dude, and basically gave it up for him. And so then she kind of starts like trying to get back into that. And it really just the overall, I guess, message was like what you need to do to like believe in yourself and to have good self-esteem and not to rely on other people for, where you see your worth. I thought it was a really well done book. There wasn't much at the end where I was like, oh, I would have changed this or that. Like I thought like the way that they wrapped it up was really good. And it's a little bit of a love story, but it's like that's not the main purpose, right? Like there's a little bit of romance, but then it's really just like a how to fall in love with yourself kind of book. So I really recommend that book. I thought it was really good. It's called The Last Phone Booth in Manhattan. And then the next book that I read was I read Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, and that book was the sequel to Fourth Wing, which I read the previous month, and I had to wait until March to read it because I used one of my Audible credits, and so I was waiting for my Audible credit to renew so that way I could listen to this book because it is a very long book. I think it's like 25 hours of listening or something. And so I wanted to be able to listen to it. I knew I wasn't going to like be able to fly through it as quickly if I actually read it. So I thought that this book was still fantastic. I really do like the Fourth Wing series. One of the things that I'm super bummed about is having to wait now because Yarros has not said like when she's going to release the third book. I think it's supposed to be sometime this year, but she's basically said like, I'm not rushing. So like, I think the first two books came out within a year of each other or like within the same year. And she was kind of like, I can't really do that anymore. So anyway, it's going to be a wait until we get her next book. But this book was a great sequel. They always try to like leave you hanging after the first one. So then you get more of the story. Obviously, the romance between, I think her name is Violet and Xaden. And there's all of that, but also there's like a lot of like lying and scheming. And I'm the kind of person who I don't like watching movies or reading books in which you know what's going on, but the other person doesn't. So like if we know what's going on in Violet's head, but she hasn't told Xaden that yet, but we know, that stuff like really bothers me because I'm like, this could all be fixed if you would just tell him that, like if you just like had this conversation, if you just communicated. So that's hard for me in books, but there are some things in this series that I get like really made me angry that Xaden was like keeping secrets from her and felt like he couldn't trust her even though she was like clearly in love with him. But I get why he wasn't telling her. And so there's like a huge reveal at the end of the book that obviously we're going to find out about throughout the rest of the series. But I'm like dying to know what happened there. So the other thing is like, it's not just like, oh, I get why he didn't tell her, but it's like truly like people could end up dead. Like if she did know, especially with like people who can like read memories and things. So, I mean, there's just so much to that makes it, there have to be some mystery to it. But also, I mean, obviously like when you get those, bombs at the end, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that that's what's going on. Or I can't believe that, how did I not see that? Or, whatever. So, the other thing is that in this book, there is a little bit of like a love triangle. It's not really a love triangle because he doesn't like the other girl, but like, I guess one of his like past exes or, whatever, joins the story. And I really like the jealousy that she feels and just like how she has to overcome that and really trust him. And then like kind of, same thing as like the last book, like really like get up her self-esteem and say like, okay, I am good enough for him. He didn't want her clearly. So I'm it for him basically. But I thought that storyline's pretty good too. And then also because like they're then forced to kind of be um, in the same area. And so then it's like they have to also learn how to get along, which I think is fun. Something that I think is interesting is that the author of these books has something that is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I've never heard of this before, but it's basically like where connective tissues and joints can be too loose, or like they don't repair as quickly as a normal person would. And so I thought that this was really cool because in the book, that's what Violet has, which they don't say that. But you know, she's always like getting hurt, and then she's hyperextending like her arms or her elbows, things like that. So I didn't know that she kind of wrote that in because of what she has. So I thought that was really interesting and cool. But I definitely would give that book still a 5-star rating because the storyline is fantastic. So still highly recommend it. I would, if I knew then what I know now, I would have waited to start this series until all 5 books were out because I would rather binge them than have to wait. So, especially because even just waiting a month, I'm like, oh, what happened there? Why was that? You know? So I'm like, I can only imagine in a year from now, I'm not going to remember anything. I'm going to have to go back and reread them. So, and I am not the rereading type. Like, I don't really love to read books more than once. So we'll see what happens with that. But the third book that I read was The Millionaire Women Next Door. And what happened was in December, I started reading this book because I was reading the Millionaire series, which is like The Millionaire Next Door, The Millionaire Mind, and then this book, The Millionaire Women Next Door by Thomas J. Stanley. And basically, I started reading the book on Hoopla, which is one of my favorite library apps. If anybody is in the Elgin area, I get mine through Galborden Library, which like I haven't had a Galborden library card for years, but I'm still able to use my old library card to get on Hoopla. So that's really cool. And I love the app because they have ebooks and audiobooks. It's super easy to use platform. But in December, when I was in the middle of reading this book, they took it off for some reason. And then I couldn't find it anywhere else. And then I just, kind of stopped reading it. But then I realized middle of this month that it was back. And so I was able to finish reading it. I did read it as an ebook on Hoopla. And like I said, the format is really nice. So, and obviously because it's connected to the library, it's free. So that's nice too. But I would say that this book specifically was my least favorite of the Millionaire series. I really, really liked The Millionaire Next Door, and I really loved the Millionaire Mind as well. But this was just like, I mean, it was basically the same thing, like anecdotes of like people who had become millionaire, but it was focused on women and how, different stories of like different women who have become millionaires and how they become millionaires. I think that one of my favorite parts of the book was where they talked about educators and how like 20% of millionaires are actually made up of educators, because not because they make a ton of money, but because they are naturally like savers, naturally frugal. They really like, they know that they don't make a lot of money, so they have to invest in order to make more money. And so that was really interesting to read, because I think that a lot of times we're like, oh, well, teachers don't make that much and this and that. But like a good majority of educators do actually become millionaires because just of how they save and invest. And so it shows that like you don't have to make a lot of money in your career in order to have money. And so that was really nice to read because obviously as an educator, I'm like, I'm never going to make a ton of money. But my husband and I do have investments both in the stock market and in real estate. And so those are actually really where we make our money and not from our careers. So I can understand how this is possible. So basically what the Millionaire series talks about is how consumerism is why people do not have money. And so I think that a lot of people are just like, oh, well, I'm never going to be a millionaire because, I can't do this or that, I didn't come from money or whatever. But at the end of the day, like if you just invest your money wisely and you don't spend it all at, like once it comes in, you don't spend it, then you could. And I do think, in this specific time period where inflation is super horrible and all that, I do think that it's harder to save money and make money. But I also think that as, Americans, we just are um, wired to spend everything that we have. Because we want to have the new iPhone. I want to have the new iPhone. So bad. You want to have like all the nice things. You want to have a nice car. You want to have nice clothing. You want to, you want to have all the things. And I am definitely one of those people who likes to have certain things. I don't spend a ton of money on myself, but when I do, I want to get things that are more quality. And so that's usually the case. Like that's, I'm not just buying a new phone every year to buy a new phone. Like once I get a new phone, I want it to be a phone that I'm going to have for the next, like at least 5 years. Same thing like with the car that I bought, I had my car for 10 years, bought a new car. I hope to have that for the next 10 years. I don't just want to be like buying things every couple of years and having all this debt, like we really like to take care of the things that we have, and, you know, take good care of it so that we can be good stewards of our money. And then the other thing too is like they do talk about donating, that a lot of people who are self-made millionaires are generous with their money. And it's so counterintuitive to feel like I need to be generous, but also like save. And there's a fine balance between that. And I think really like God leads you in that way, because that's exactly how it's gone for us. Like, we do tithe 10% of our income. And then we also give above and beyond at the end of the year, just to like other organizations. And I think some people think that that's crazy, but like for us, like we know that we want to be generous with our income because it's not from us. Like all the money that we have, our investments and things like that, like the places where we have made money has all been from God. And so we really believe that, and we give back because of that. So the other thing though is like they talk about how there is also a fine line between like being a good steward of your finances and, like being a little bit frugal, and then being like a miser, like a Scrooge, where like you want to count every penny and stuff. And so you really have to find a good balance between the two. My dad actually texted me while I was reading this book, which was really crazy. But he just was like, you can't take money with you. So, he's at the point in his life where he's retired and he wants to spend his money how he wants to spend it, which, you can. And it's true. Like when we leave this earth, the money's going to stay here. All of the things that we bought with it are going to stay here. So I think what our goal is, mine and my husband's, is to leave the world a better place than we found it. And so some of the ways that we do that are by donating to our church, donating to organizations, and most recently we're going to be starting our foster care journey. Well, like not that we haven't already started it, like we've gone through the whole process of becoming licensed and actually just got licensed last weekend. So, that's another way that we want to use our finances to bless others. And so, I think that that's just kind of what the purpose of money is, right? To be able to do things for other people. And so, I really liked this book in terms of that. I would only give it like a 4-star rating, mostly because I think the information is good, but it's still pretty dry. And it did take me a long time to finish, because I did start it in December and I just didn't get through it fast enough before it got taken off of Hoopla. And so I'm glad that it got put back on and I was able to finish it. The next book that I read was a Freida McFadden book, because I love Freida McFadden and I love her books. This one I would give a 4-star, and mostly because it was called The Teacher, okay? And so it's about teachers, and there are some things in the book that I find to be questionable. And so I listened to this one on Hoopla, and Hoopla does have a lot of like the Freida McFadden books and Colleen Hoover and like those like more popular artist or authors. And so that's nice too when I'm like trying to like binge an author. I love when they're all on there. But so the thing about Freida McFadden is that in her books that somebody is always going to die. Okay. The first book that I read, I was like, there's no way that somebody dies in this book. It's going to be, pretty PG. No. I feel like every book that I've read of her is like somebody has died in some way, shape, or form. And so, like, obviously, and I mean, the first, like, the prologue talks about how somebody dies. So it's not like it's like a big surprise. But this book is about teachers. And so the wife and the husband are married and they're both teachers. And the husband is like this super popular teacher. He's very handsome. And then the wife is kind of like plain and she's a little bit more of like a strict teacher. So people don't like her as much. And then you also get the perspective of one of the students. And so one of the things that I really don't like about this book, and one of the reasons why I rated it a 4, is because there is some inappropriate stuff between teachers and their students. And so I am not about that. Like, I think that's disgusting, obviously. I mean, I would say most people do. And so I don't know. I mean, it wasn't like a super shock, like, when you're reading the book, like you can kind of tell like what's going on or whatever. But of course there was a twist at the end. And, if there's anything about Freida McFadden, it's that her twists are going to be like as jaw dropping as possible. And the last 2 that I've read, last month I read The Axe and this month I read The Teacher, and both of them had me just questioning the plot line. Like, where did I miss something? And, just wondering things. It doesn't like tie it up in a pretty bow like I want it to. But so like one example is that there's a guy in the story named Jay, and at the end, like you can find out a little bit more about who he is, but then it just has me like questioning how was he portrayed throughout the whole story, and like the believability of who he ends up being. And I don't know, it just was kind of weird. But obviously I've read enough of her books now to know like there's always going to be like little nuggets dropped throughout the story for like players who are going to be in the story later in the game. And, I guess, right, I think in this book on 2 accounts, like I guessed 2 things right. But then there was another one where I was like, that came out of left field. Like I never would have guessed that. So I don't know. I just think that like the book was really good, 4 stars. But I probably could have done without the inappropriateness of the teacher-student relationships. So I still would recommend it though. Still would recommend the book, The Teacher. The next book that I read was Humility by Andrew Murray. And this book is actually a book, I think it was written in like the 1800s. And I'm not sure if the version that I read was like revamped or not, but basically it's just a story about what humility is, gives examples from the Bible. It's a little bit dense, like some of the language is a little bit harder to understand, especially because the Bible verses that they have within the story were from the King James version, and I do not read King James. It's very hard for me to follow and to understand. So, just that kind of stuff. And then I did listen to this on Hoopla as well, and I gave it a 3-star rating because of like the language and stuff like that. I think that it's a wonderful book to read when you're trying to become more humble and you need to just like figure out what that looks like in your life. I think that was, for me, it was really good to just like listen to and think, how am I being humble in my life? And the thing is like, it says in the book that sometimes we think we're being humble, but really we're just doing something to be rewarded. And so there's a difference between those motives. Like, are you actually humbling yourself before the Lord, or are you humbling yourself because you want, an earthly reward, right? But this story actually coincided with me reading the book of Matthew, because one of my other things that I did this month on top of reading these 6 books was I read the 4 books of the Bible, which are considered the Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I read Matthew first because we're watching The Chosen. And so I wanted to kind of see the way that Matthew writes because of his character in The Chosen. And then I actually read John second, which is the 4th book. And then I went back to Luke and then read Mark last. So I kind of jumped around with those. But I just thought it was neat to see like the parallels between the book I was reading on humility, reading Matthew, who, humbled himself by leaving his life as this like luxury tax collector and following Jesus, and then also watching The Chosen. So, towards the end of Lent, I felt like I think I talked about earlier that I wasn't feeling super close to God during the season of Lent, but towards the end of Lent, like once I really started to not think about social media as much anymore, I started to read the Gospels, watch The Chosen, read this book. Like a lot of those things just really helped me feel a little bit closer to God at the end of Lent. And then the other thing is that, and I know I've talked about this a lot on here, and I'm going to do a video on it, is it made me think a lot about quitting my job and how it's very scary. And I don't know, it's just like hard to make that jump. But reading this book was kind of the perfect push I needed to just do it, just get it over with. So I'm really looking forward to actually doing that and to then talking about it with you about what that will look like and why I did it and all of that. And then the last book that I read this month, actually listened to on Hoopla, was it's called Baby-Led Weaning by Gill, Rapley, and Tracey Murkett. And basically the reason why I listened to this book, and I'm actually going to listen to one more on Baby-Led Weaning, is because Ellie, my daughter, is about to turn 6 months, actually next Sunday. So we're going to start solids with her. She has hit the milestones now. She is sitting up on her own, and she'll be 6 months next week. So like once that, all the things happen, then we can start baby-led weaning. And so basically we have done this with our other 2 children, and it's just feeding them what you eat, and all that. But this book really went into like what is like the best for baby to be eating, such as like this type of yogurt over that type, how to serve certain things and, stuff like that. So things that I like pretty much already know. I'm in a couple of Facebook groups that really talk about baby-led weaning, but just kind of wanted to, listen to it and make sure, okay, is my baby ready for this? Because I really don't want to start her on solids if I don't feel like she is. It talks a lot about like the difference in like from when we were kids and even when our parents were kids and our grandparents were kids, and what feeding a baby looked like at all these different points in history. And so it's just interesting how a lot of that was so fueled by like Gerber and the baby food companies and stuff like that. I don't know, I always just find stuff interesting about how our food is being regulated because of the way that the government works and the way that lobbying works and money and consumerism. I don't know. It just all is crazy to me. So I thought that was very interesting. And, we'll just continue to do baby-led weaning, skip the purees, skip the Gerber, and just do that. So I didn't really rate this book. I think it's, I'd give it a 4. Interesting information like the Millionaire book, but kind of dry. Just I did listen to it on Hoopla. And so Hoopla really came clutch this month. I did a lot of ebooks and listening on Hoopla. So I do appreciate that service. And if you have not ever checked it out before, you should. The other book app that I use with my Bastrop library card is Libby. So Libby is another one that has a lot of free books. And then even I actually had one book that was not on Libby, and I just tagged it and said, notify me if it comes available. And it actually did a couple months ago. That happened. So now I've been tagging more books that are not on Libby, but I want to read, and just waiting to see if they come up eventually. So at the end of this, I'm going to leave you with just one piece of scripture. This came to my mind today, which sometimes this happens where like I'll just have a scripture like playing in my mind. And so this is the one that came up. It is from James 1, and I need to find it really quick. So it's James 1:17, and it says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. By his own choice, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits of his creatures." And so basically, that really goes along with like the humility book that I read. It goes along with just writing on here. It got kind of weird after I did that. So sorry. But I just think it went along with like kind of what I was talking about today. And that is to just recognize that all of our, like the good things in our lives really come from God. And for me, reading is such a joy, and I love to read. So I've been trying to kind of give myself a little bit more grace and prioritize the things that are important to me, or the things that I enjoy doing, over the things that I have to do, because I know that those things are from God as well, and I want to live a life of enjoyment and not just be living for work, and to like be productive, because that's not all of who I am. So just in case you need that encouragement today, there's that for you, and I'll see you next week.